A decade of national renewal. That is what Prime Minister Keir Starmer promised us in 2023. Today, we're still hungry for change, and a lot of that centers around housing, with a need for more homes in more areas. Now, housing is not the complete story of what we need in this country, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about the part it plays, as well as the role other schemes have in making sure our country is as great as we want it to be. We're talking about regeneration. Joining me, I have two experts in regeneration. I've got Stephen Heverin, the Director of Growth and Regeneration at Onward Homes, who are leading regeneration efforts in Hattersley and Preston. And also joining me, I have Phil Marsden, Managing Director at the Northwest at Muse, which is leading on regeneration efforts in Salford, St. Helens, Wythenshawe, Oldham, and much more. Now, we hear a lot about regeneration. It's definitely very much a buzzword, but I want to drill down into what actually it looks like when it's effective. So what should we be looking for when it comes to regeneration, and how can we measure its success? Stephen, why don't you start us off?
With the really big question.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a complex thing, regeneration. I think it's not easily measured, but it's easily seen. I think it's something that you can see when you walk down the streets. Place looks fresher, it feels more vibrant, businesses are thriving. People are working, the schools are looking good, and that is the outcome of some really hard work, both physical, economic, social, and regeneration encompasses all of those. It's not just assembling land and building buildings. You've got to create the conditions for people to thrive, and I think that's, in a nutshell, that's what I think it boils down to. How can you measure it is all of that. You can put the pounds and pence on it. You can talk about the increase in economic activity and all that kind of stuff, but it's a feeling as well. I think a place feels vibrant, feels happy, and people feel kind of part of a community.
Phil, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think Stephen's touched on it there for me, but naturally when you think about regeneration, you think about infrastructure and buildings and public realm, which is clearly a very important part of regeneration. But for me, regeneration is about people and improving people's lives, and if it's not about that, I don't know what it's about. And obviously the physical aspects of regeneration, all that, like I say, all that infrastructure and the buildings and the homes and the new commercial space is the vehicle to improve people's lives. And for me, that's really what regeneration is about.
Now, I started us off with talking about Keir Starmer's promise for that decade of national renewal. But when it comes to the projects you guys have been working on, they span much more than just 10 years. I mean, Hattersley's been going on for at least 20, and I think Salford Central's around the same time frame. So when you're looking back on those projects that have been going on for 20 plus years, what do you think is the big takeaway as to what works for regeneration?
Again, another big question. So I think primarily it is about partnership. There's no route to regenerate in an area, a place, without other partners involved. A housing association cannot do it on its own. A local authority can't do it on its own. The private sector can't do it on its own. You have to come together. Without that, it will not work. You can do bits and you can improve what you can control, but part of the complexity of regeneration, I think Phil would probably know better than I, that if you don't come together and the sum is greater than the parts, then you don't get the holistic regeneration that you set out to do. So for me, it's primarily about partnerships, I think.
All right, partnerships, number one. Number two, give me another takeaway, Phil.
Just on that, obviously, I completely agree. Everything we do as a business is in partnership with normally a local authority as our development partner, but that partnership model stems right through the process, and I think there's no better example for me. And I am obviously biased, but I think Salford Central is probably one of the best examples of really truly transformational regeneration. And yeah, we've been, like you said, Julie, we've been working on that scheme for 20 years. So I think if you look back to sort of 2006, 2007, you'd have seen Phil Mail, RMD, stood on some windswept car parks in Salford as sort of spinning field was being built down towards the River Irwell. And you fast forward 20 years now, and we've got over 1,000 new homes, passive house, affordable homes included in that, 700,000 square feet of commercial space, which are home to businesses like BT and the government, Eversheds, We've got one of the best performing commercial buildings as in Eden in terms of its sustainability criteria. And like I mentioned before, all of that has provided some hugely wide-ranging economic benefits for Salford as a local authority, but also for the people of Salford. And it feels natural now when you walk around Salford Central, like it was always meant to be. And like I say, it does feel sort of natural. You walk down there and you see bars and cafes now, and people sat outside on Chapel Street, which was 15 years ago it's still quite car dominated, but was incredibly, heavily dominated by traffic on the A6. And you reflect back as to what we've done and how we've transformed and regenerated that part of Salford. And there's a huge amount involved in it. But without a doubt, none of it happens without a strong partnership. That is absolutely fundamental to it. And the relationship we've got with Salford Council as our development partner is incredible. The vision we had when Phil was stood on those car parks to see what was coming with our council partners and stick at it has been absolutely key to it. And then as we've gone through, we've developed other partnerships that have come off the back of that. So, whether that's partnerships with RPs or contractors or other members of our supply chain that has allowed us to deliver. And it's Stephen's point about really it has to come together holistically. So this isn't about picking off one building and developing that and then forgetting about the rest. The ability that we have in partnership is to look at the wider opportunities and knit everything together and provide that platform for the regeneration to then happen. So partnership, strong vision, resilience to just keep going. Over a 20-year scheme like Salford Central, it's a roller coaster ride. You go through some really difficult, think of all the things that have happened over the last 20 years that we've worked through, and that resilience to just keep going, not always knowing the answer. I mean, that if you're in regeneration and you want certainty over an outcome and a route to that outcome, it's not for you. You've got to be able to have confidence that you'll find a way. You might not know what that way is, but that resilience and that sort of not blind optimism, but a level of optimism that you'll get there if you truly believe in the vision is so critical. And again, it all comes back to a strong partnership. So I know you asked me for something other than partnership, but I have to reinforce how critical that is.
Well, you touched on a few things in there as well. You talked about, the importance of community buy-in, and also you referenced traffic and getting that right. So there's actually good movement and flow. One of the things I thought was interesting that you mentioned, though, was talking about how you brought in employment opportunities through Eden being a great green office. And in Hattersley, obviously, there's the hub, which has brought in more jobs for that area. I guess, could you sum up, actually, what's happened at Hattersley?
As you say, the opportunities that people had in Hattersley 20 years ago are far, far removed from what they have today, how it looks today. And that came down, as Phil said, came down to having a vision and having the resilience to keep going and having the kind of passion to deliver the outcomes. And ourselves, we were in partnership with Homes England, with Barratt's and with Tameside Council. And we properly started about 12, 13 years ago on an estate that, hardly any people were in employment. The educational attainment was through the floor for children. The life chances are really poor. All of the things that you already kind of understand an area in need of regeneration to have. And we started with the basics. We started with removing the properties that nobody wanted to live in, moving the properties that weren't fit for purpose, and created a partnership with Barratt's that allowed them to realise land value way, way down the line. But they themselves took the risk on building a new community there. But we brought the local authority in and said to the local authority, at the same time as they are putting their money where their mouth is and they're trying to bring in new economically active people and give more chances to those people who are living in Hattersley to live in Hattersley for longer, because the properties are all the same. They're all 3-bed terraces. If you don't want a 3-bed terrace, or you're starting a family, or you're at the end of your or latter stages of your life, you need different opportunities. It didn't offer that. So Barratt's mixed that up. Alongside that, the local authority changed the education boundary. So the school that was in Hattersley was very poor performing school. Changing the education boundary brought other children into that kind of environment, and they feed off each other, and they learn and they work, and the educational attainment is way up now. So it's it's like an intangible thing almost, that it's not physical, it's not about land assembly or anything like that. So that happened. And once there's confidence in the area, I think once people saw that Onward were in Hattersley for the long term, that Onward was not going to go away and did care about the outcomes and the residents, and not just the physical kind of side of it or the profit side of it, of which there isn't any, by the way, for us. But they got confidence in us, and then they start believing in what's happening, and they start to go along on the journey with you more and more. So we set up what was called a land board with all of the partners I mentioned previously, including community representatives, and they really started to drive forward the change at that point for me, because it is essentially a state regeneration. But in there we've got a huge Tesco Extra, we've got a 91-bed extra care facility, which has allowed people to retain independence for much longer than they would have done had they stayed in their existing homes, which has saved the NHS money. We've got a new surgery going in, and a whole new retail park being like a neighbourhood retail park being built in there. At the same time, there's huge areas of forest in Hattersley that not many people know about. You would just think it was just trees. They're called the cloughs. So these cloughs, there are deer in these cloughs, but there were also lots of cars and lots of shopping trolleys in there. And one of the things we're doing is clearing those cloughs. We're creating pathways. We're giving people their green space back, if you know what I mean. So there'll be park runs in the clough. There'll be people can take their children, all of that stuff, and that happens because we had a long-term vision and we had a long-term partnership that helped create the building blocks for that vision to be a reality. So I think you can't see any of that when you start. I think you're right what you said. You can't see that this is where it's going to end up. You can just see almost the next thing in front of you, but you know what you want to try and achieve, and it's having some faith, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, I want to go back to both of you guys have been talking about vision. That's come up about 10 times, I think, by my count. What does a good vision look like, and how do you straddle that line between ambition and achievable? That's another big question. We should call this the Big Question podcast, really. So maybe I should go to you, Stephen, because you love the big questions.
I get all the big questions, don't I? So what should the vision be, was the question.
Yeah. How do you, should it be this wonderful pie in the sky kind of thing, just to get, show people that there's hope, there's potential? Or should it be something more achievable? But how do you make it achievable and not boring, not, unambitious? How do you walk that line?
So I don't know. Do you remember Will Alsop's The Cloud on the Three Graces side? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
They were going to build this wonderful cloud-like building to go right next to the Liver building, and half the people who saw it laughed, and the other half that looks amazing. What a big visionary thing to do that is. And it never got built, did it? But the point is, I think it set the tone, it set the conversation for people to say, well, was it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Who would go and live and work in that building? Would investors come in? And you need to see that there's ambition. If you're in the private sector, I imagine you need to see that the public sector is serious about creating a place that people want to live in and that businesses want to come and thrive in and all of that stuff. So I think the vision doesn't necessarily have to be achievable in itself, but it has to be loud, it has to be ambitious, and it has to make people sit up and go, well, and I've thought about investing in Liverpool, for example, actually, or Salford. Salford's just the bit at the other side of the river in Manchester. We don't really, what is that? And it's not, it's right next to Manchester. It is effectively the same place, do you know what I mean? And what's happened there is it's expanded it. Similarly in North Liverpool, where we're working with partners up there. North Liverpool's been something I've been involved in for a very long time in different roles, and it's struggled in the past to have its own vision, if you like. It doesn't, it was a lot of old terraced housing that was set up for dock workers. There's far too many of them now for the population that's there. So we had housing market renewal, and that had its own vision, but it was quite a boring vision. It was a vision of people having what you would expect people to have, which is a driveway, a garden, central heating that worked, a place that you could just live in. But its relationship to Liverpool city centre and all of the kind of economic activity that came off the back of capital culture, for example, it didn't really hit with North Liverpool. It didn't connect to it. Whereas there are other places in Liverpool that have connected to it, Baltic Triangle, Toxteth and so on. It didn't happen up there, and I don't know the answer, but we've got to ask the question why. What was wrong with it? Is there anything wrong with the vision? Does it need a new vision? And that's starting to happen now. You've got things going on down there, like the 10 streets. You've got pool waters and so on. So it's kind of finding its way, but it takes a very long time. And I think that goes back to your point about resilience, isn't it? You've got to keep with it.
I think again, completely agree with Stephen. We shouldn't get confused with vision in terms of, you can think of a vision and think of a big, hugely fantastic building or a massive infrastructure move that's really, and really for us, when we're talking to local authority partners, we want to understand how the vision relates to the place. And so if I look at, say, Salford Crescent, the vision there is to create a place for the community and improve people's lives. That's like the sort of out the overarching vision that we can completely then buy into. And then clearly there's other aspects to how that vision is broken down, and we want to create a mixed tenure of homes, and we're working with the university, a partner in Crescent, so we've got the opportunity to develop a new innovation zone back on the back of the university strengths that's bordering some of the most deprived communities in the country. So the vision is to make sure that the university, the innovation zone, is accessible to those people who are growing up in those deprived communities now, and then they get the opportunity to live in really good low energy housing in Crescent, and that the infrastructure moves from being car dominated to more sustainable modes. So all that vision, that it really clear, it works for the place, it relates to the place, it's bold, but it's deliverable and it's achievable. And I think sometimes you can think of a vision as a CGI that shows the Crescent with no cars on and boats running down the River Irwell and pedalos on the Irwell going, and it's like that. It's just an image of what it might look like in the end, but the vision must meet the place. I think for us, we're always clear that we want to deliver what we say we're going to deliver. So I think it is right to be bold, but we always want to deliver what we say. So it has to be deliverable for me as well.
Thinking about the projects that you're currently on site with or hoping to get on site with soon, what do you think are the biggest challenges you're facing when it comes to delivering these wide-scale regeneration efforts? Phil, it's your turn in the hot seat.
Good. So I think we've got a lot of schemes at the moment in sort of pre-development, so working through to getting onto site later this year and into next year. The majority of our schemes out of the Northwest office of Muse are town centre, residential-led town centre, but mixed-use schemes focused on an urban regeneration. A lot of work in GM and other areas of Liverpool and Blackpool, for example, but all based around town centre regeneration. So we don't have any schemes at the moment in Manchester city centre. Obviously, we're working on Wythenshawe, but I class that as a town centre regency. The challenges there are very different actually to what we say faced on Salford Central. With Salford Central, we were on the edge of the city centre. It didn't feel like it at the time when you go back 20 years, but Spinningfields was coming down and was making its way to the river, and we were able to build off the back of that with the commercial district at New Bailey. The places where we're now working, we don't have that. So we don't have a Spinningfields and a Manchester city centre to build off, but there are obviously lots of other very positive aspects to the places where we're working. As I touched on before, the opportunity to regenerate town centres is phenomenal, and but there are different challenges then, because you can sort of draw rings from Manchester city centre out, and the further out you get, the more difficult the viability challenge becomes. I think typically that's true. So sorry to say it, but when we're delivering high quality town centre regen with good levels of high quality low energy housing, viability is a challenge, simply because the costs are outweighing the values. It's as simple as that. Now we're finding routes through that. And there's new innovative ways coming out in terms of funding models. Again, working in partnership with local authorities and registered providers and build-to-rent funders is certainly helping to work our way through. But viability is a big challenge for us. you've then got other challenges just around town centre development. There are complicated schemes to pull together, whether that's dealing with land acquisition and utility diversions and other stuff like that. But the consistent sort of challenge is probably viability. And then we've got the Building Safety Act coming along as well, which is another short-term challenge. And I deliberately say short-term.
All right, so viability, Building Safety Act, other challenges.
Yeah, I think from an Onward point of view, I think it might even be more straightforward than that. I think for us, if you take Preston as a good example, Hattersley was also a good example, as is North Liverpool was another area that we're working in. Land assembly and funding, for me, if we're not talking about, but I mean, town centres particularly, land assembly is really critical, isn't it? But we're kind of have a saying in our team in Onward, you have a vision, which is what do we want this place to look like, and then you have the things that you can control. And if you, as in the partners that you end up working with, can control as much as possible, then you've got more chance of reaching that vision. If you don't, you can only deal with the things that you can control. And as we're talking about, physical regeneration, the assembly of land is the most difficult part of the process for me, because it involves funding, viability, planning, all of those things. Sometimes compulsory purchase orders, and to do that you don't just need money, you need powers, you need renewal powers, you need the ability to pull government and local authorities into the mix, and for them to perhaps do things they wouldn't normally do. And it was a little bit more common maybe 20 years ago that would be led by the public sector and bring the private sector along. I think what we're seeing recently is that there's a lot more expectation on private sector, and include housing associations in that, to drive the change, because local authorities got their own challenges and money has been tight and all of that kind of stuff. So for me, sitting around the table and trying to say, how can we assemble a land to make this happen, I think is one of the biggest challenges.
What do we do to, kind of confront these viability challenges and gaps?
Yeah, it's money, and obviously we've seen with the government announcements about decade of national renewal, there will be a lot of money flying around, but if it's not processed correctly, then it will fly around in the wrong places and it won't achieve the aims. The money bunched together to deliver place-based solutions will be much more effectively spent than money siloed into, this is for housing, this is for NHS, this is for transport. I think it's extremely pie in the sky, difficult ask this, but if you can put that together and say, right, what does for example North Liverpool need? Well, it needs, what's the vision? How do we think we're getting there? Who needs to be involved? And what do we need to spend money on? You'll find that the money aspect of it is myriad. There's so many places you can put that money into, and you need to be flexible enough with the funding solutions to be able to kind of mix it together. The ingredients, if you like, the financial ingredients need to go into one pot to help do the placemaking. I think without that, you're fighting a little bit of a losing battle to get the same level of outcome for people as you would have done if you put them together.
Yeah, and they just did a giant review of the Levelling Up Fund, and that was one of the big things they found out. They're like, this would have been better if, rather than attaching it to single projects and making everyone bid for it, is if we just done one big, here you go, do what's best.
They used to have, do you remember SRB, single regeneration budget? So the clues in the name back then, I think.
So I think we've been having some conversations actually about how we might be able to work together. Hopefully Stephen doesn't mind me saying that. And I think everything Stephen said there is absolutely spot on. I think one of the areas we can help with that is that, say that one of the particular areas where I've been discussing with Stephen is where Onward own a number of sites that are there for redevelopment. But actually, if you sort of zoom out from that and you look at the wider area, there's a much bigger opportunity for regeneration, which obviously benefits the local authority. If that can be done, it would benefit Onward, because their sites and their housing then sits in a regenerated place. And I think from our perspective, the earlier we can get involved, or not always us, but a master developer can get involved with a local authority partner to look strategically at an area that encompasses, there's always going to be land, third-party land interest to deal with, and but right from the start, to set that vision, to get the platform established, to then enable that regeneration to come forward and to bring things together in a cohesive, coordinated way. So rather than one developer doing one thing on their own there with their red line around their building, developing that, but then not really sort of caring about what happens outside of that red line, although commercially they would have an interest, but not perhaps necessarily interested in how it knits together in terms of public realm and the wider. As a master developer, you can sort of look over all of that, and it doesn't mean you do everything. So other developers will come along and develop their buildings, absolutely fine, but it's done in a coordinated and cohesive way. And the earlier a master developer can get involved in that process, the better, because they can then start to establish what's needed, those fundamentals, and get that platform built, whether it's site clearance, utilities diverted, funding opportunities looked at holistically, and then bringing partners along the way to move that forward. I think that doesn't solve it, but is a really good direction of travel.
Now, this is kind of pivoting away from regeneration to talk about generation, but both of you have mentioned the importance of the public sector kind of getting in there first and setting the scene. Obviously, there's no area where the government's going to be setting the scene more than new towns. We're supposed to be getting a list of those by the end of the summer, where they think that the ideal new towns will be. There's hoping for about 12, last I saw. But what advice would you give our new towns task force and the government as they approach this way of building a community from the ground up, rather than taking what's existing and giving it new life?
Gosh, I don't know. That is a massive question. Never mind a big question. So I think that I've got a bit of a history with new towns and kind of garden villages, that kind of whole momentum and the origins of it, and kind of the town planning principles of long-term land value capture. And you look at places like Skelmersdale, Runcorn, Warrington, I suppose, is a bad example because it's quite a successful place. But a lot of those 1960s, 70s new towns are being regenerated now because of failure. Why did they fail? They had brilliant transport links. They had work that in many cases was no more than 5 minutes from somebody's house. You could have access to the bus routes or whatever it was. And they failed because of the macroeconomic challenges that the country faced as industry was shut down and all of that. And they were a victim of that as much as anything else. And then the kind of the generations later, the worklessness and all the rest of it had set in, and the reputation becomes a thing, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy again. And I think this government now is talking about a new generation of new towns. I think it's talking more about lovely settlements on the edge of already successful places like Cambridge and Oxford and all that kind of stuff. And it's a slightly different concept to regeneration. In terms of what do we need? What do they need to do? I think you need a long-term vision, talking about that again. But from the government's point of view, they need a long-term commitment. So political cycles is something that I've seen in my career hinder regeneration time and time again. You get 5 years of a government, and then housing market renewal is a great example. Halfway through the program, not even halfway through the program, and then sliced completely, just taken away overnight, and work stops, and it just places are half finished, they're half regenerated, and that's no good. So back when those new towns were built, there was development corporations who had a lot of power taken away from central government and given to those corporations to assemble land, to deliver compulsory purchase orders, to bring together partners. The funding was theirs, but it was over a longer period. And until we accept, which I think we're getting to that point, that regeneration isn't a quick fix and will go across political cycles. You've got to the tools have to go across political cycles as well. Mm-hmm. You can't have another government come in 4 years' time and say, we don't like new towns, we're stopping. That doesn't get you anywhere.
Phil, what advice would you give?
To be honest, I think Stephen's nailed it, Julia. I really do. So, yeah.
Well done. That's it. That's the podcast. Done.
I don't think there's much more advice I could give on that. So I think it's a cracking answer.
So if I was going to sum up today's podcast about the big tips and tricks for cracking regeneration, it feels like vision, number 1. Number 2, resilience and perseverance. Don't just give up at the first kind of rough bit, and persevere through those first 4 years or 4 projects. multi-generation was something that came up a few times, that in having multi-tenure, you guys talked about the schemes that were successful. You didn't lean into them just being, all young professionals. It sounded like there was, we're bringing in old people, we're bringing in young people, different backgrounds. So that was something I've taken away. As well as it seems like it's important to be flexible, to not, kind of say, this is the hill I'm going to die on, it has to look exactly this way. But to kind of say, it's okay to not be certain exactly. We're going to work with this as it goes. Would you guys say I'm missing anything in particular else, or have I done a cracking good job at summing this up?
Cracking good job. Partnerships, though.
Oh, partnership. Gosh, how could I forget? We spent 10 minutes on partnership.
Partnerships and community, the existing communities and the places where you're working, and regenerating with that community is fundamental.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for joining me on the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it. And if you want to know more about what Onward Homes is up to, check out onward.co.uk. And if you want to know more about what's going on in the Northwest, including all the great developments that Onward and Muse are doing, check out placenorthwest.co.uk. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast channel we have so you never miss an episode.